Major General Maurice Ellington, a highly decorated officer in the United States Army with over 3 decades of service, was accustomed to commanding respect wherever he went. A veteran of multiple deployments, including the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, Ellington had long been a symbol of integrity, leadership, and quiet dignity. On a humid afternoon in Hope Mills, North Carolina, a small town just south of Fayetteville, near Fort Liberty, formerly Fort Bragg, he stopped at a local gas station to refuel his government-issued SUV while en route to a leadership conference. What began as a routine pit stop quickly spiraled into a humiliating and infuriating encounter that would reverberate across the country within hours. Wearing his Army combat uniform, Ellington moved with a composed efficiency that came from decades of military service. As he exited his vehicle, a dark Ford Expedition with military plates, he noticed a patrol car idling nearby. Inside was Officer Ryan Stokes, a relatively new member of the Hope Mills Police Department. Stokes, a white officer in his late 20s, observed Ellington closely, his eyes narrowing as the general swiped his government fuel card and began filling his tank. Within minutes, Stokes pulled up alongside the pump, exited his cruiser, and approached Ellington. According to witness accounts and later confirmed by surveillance footage, Stokes demanded to see Ellington's identification almost immediately, his hand already resting on his belt near his taser. Some witnesses later said there was no reasonable cause for the stop. No speeding, no suspicious behavior, just a black man in uniform at a gas station. Ellington used the protocol, responded calmly. He handed over his military ID, his driver's license, and even presented his Pentagon travel orders without protest. But Officer Stokes appeared uninterested in the credentials. He examined the military ID for no more than a second before dismissively handing it back and ordering Ellington to turn around and place his hands behind his back. Stunned, Ellington calmly but firmly asked why he was being detained. Stokes refused to answer, repeating his command louder, drawing the attention of bystanders at the gas station and nearby shops. As Ellington was handcuffed, the disbelief among the growing crowd was palpable. Murmurs of confusion and anger rippled through the onlookers, several of whom began recording with their smartphones. It was then that Deputy Raphael Boone, a Cumberland County Sheriff's deputy in plain clothes, noticed a commotion. Boone had stopped for a sandwich at the gas station's convenience store and was heading back to his unmarked car when he spotted the scene unfolding. Boone froze when he recognized a man being handcuffed. Major General Maurice Ellington had been his commanding officer during a 15-month deployment to Iraq years earlier. Boone, like many who had served under Ellington, carried immense respect for the general, not just for his battlefield leadership, but for the compassion he showed his soldiers. He had once personally advocated for Boone's early medical evacuation after Boone was injured by an IED blast near Mosul. To see Ellington treated with such disrespect was more than Boone could bear. Without hesitation, Boone approached the scene, flashing his badge and loudly identifying himself as a deputy sheriff. He demanded that Officer Stokes explain the cause of the detention. Stokes, visibly rattled but stubborn, refused to engage and insisted Boone step back. Boone, his voice firm and commanding, told Stokes that he knew exactly who Ellington was, and that he was making a catastrophic mistake. The confrontation grew heated. Boone ordered Stokes to remove the handcuffs immediately and warned him that he was unlawfully detaining a federal officer. Boone's intervention emboldened the crowd, who began calling out for Stokes to let him go and read the ID. Several witnesses stepped closer, and the atmosphere at the gas station became electric with outrage. Meanwhile, Major General Ellington remained remarkably composed despite the humiliation. Even with his hands cuffed tightly behind his back, he stood tall, his bearing unmistakable. He repeatedly told Stokes that he was willing to cooperate, asking for a superior officer to be called to the scene. It was only when Boone physically stepped between Stokes and Ellington, threatening to arrest Stokes for unlawful detention, that Stokes, red-faced and sweating, reluctantly removed the cuffs. Ellington massaged his wrists where the metal had bitten into his skin. Boone stood protectively at his side. Within minutes, additional law enforcement officers arrived, responding to calls from concerned citizens and reports of disturbance. Among them was Hope Mills Police Chief Sandra Whitaker, who was briefed rapidly by Boone and the gathering officers. Chief Whitaker, A career law enforcement officer with a reputation for professionalism immediately recognized the severity of the situation. She approached General Ellington personally, apologized profusely for the incident, and ordered Stokes to stand down. The general, ever professional, responded with quiet dignity, thanking Whitaker for her apology, but making it clear that the matter would not end there. By then, several bystanders had uploaded videos of the encounter to social media. The footage showed a uniformed general, clearly presenting valid identification, being handcuffed without cause by a white officer who appeared to ignore both protocol and basic respect. Within hours, hashtags like hashtag Justice for Ellington and hashtag Hope Mills Incident were trending on X, formerly Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Prominent veterans organizations, civil rights groups, and political leaders from across the country condemned the incident, demanding accountability. Media outlets descended on Hope Mills almost immediately. Local news stations ran interviews with witnesses, many of whom expressed disbelief and anger at what they had seen. National networks picked up the story, featuring the video on evening broadcasts. Within 24 hours, statements were issued by the Pentagon, the Department of the Army, and several influential civil rights organizations. The NAACP called for a full investigation, citing the incident as a troubling example of racial profiling and the erosion of trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. Under mounting pressure, the Hope Mills Police Department placed Officer Stokes on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. Chief Whitaker, during a press conference held 2 days after the incident, acknowledged the public outrage and promised a thorough and transparent review. She expressed her personal regret that a distinguished service member had been treated with such disrespect and emphasized that no one, regardless of uniform or status, should be subjected to unjust treatment. For his part, Major General Ellington maintained a measured public stance. In a written statement, he said, "I have spent my life defending the principles of justice, equality, and respect for all people. What happened to me was not just about one officer's actions. It reflects deeper challenges that we, as a nation, must confront. I am grateful for citizens who stood with me and for Deputy Boone's courageous intervention. I look forward to a fair investigation and meaningful dialogue that moves us toward a more just society." Deputy Boone was hailed as a hero by many, though he brushed off the praise. "I just did what I had to do," he told reporters. You don't let wrong go unchallenged, especially when it's someone you owe your life to. In the weeks that followed, the incident spurred a broader conversation in Hope Mills and across the country about racial profiling, police training, and respect for military service members. The Hope Mills Town Council held a special session to hear from community members, many of whom spoke emotionally about their experiences and fears. Major General Ellington's encounter at that small gas station became a powerful symbol, a reminder that no amount of medals or service could shield someone from the biases that still persist. Yet, it also sparked a movement toward accountability and reform, as people of all backgrounds rallied to demand better from those sworn to protect and serve. The story of that day, of injustice, intervention, and resilience, would not be easily forgotten. The fallout was swift and unforgiving. Within days of the video going viral, a deeper investigation into Officer Ryan Stokes' background unearthed troubling details. Records from his previous tenure at a small police department in Florida revealed a pattern of misconduct allegations, including several complaints of excessive force and racial bias. Though none had led to criminal convictions, internal affairs reports had flagged Stokes as a high-risk officer, warnings that had apparently been overlooked during his hiring process in Hope Mills. In light of the public pressure and the revelations, Stokes was first placed on indefinite suspension and subsequently terminated from the department. But the consequences didn't end there. The Cumberland County District Attorney's Office, citing overwhelming evidence, filed charges against Stokes for false imprisonment, unlawful detention, and official misconduct. The decision to prosecute sent a clear message that the community would not tolerate abuses of power, especially those rooted in prejudice. At a press conference announcing the charges, District Attorney Melissa Carter emphasized, "No one is above the law. Wearing a badge is a sacred trust, and when that trust is violated, it is our duty to seek justice." Meanwhile, Major General Maurice Ellington, ever the embodiment of grace under fire, declined to fan the flames of personal outrage. A decorated officer who had spent his career navigating the most volatile environments on the planet, Ellington approached the aftermath with the same discipline and thoughtfulness he had demonstrated on the battlefield. He refused to make the incident about personal grievance or public spectacle. When reporters pressed him for sensational sound bites, Ellington consistently redirected the conversation toward systemic issues. In a carefully worded interview on national television, Ellington remarked, "This isn't about me alone. It's about how quickly perception can override truth, about how deeply ingrained biases still color the way people see black men, even those in uniform. My story is visible because of my rank, my service, but thousands of others face the same or worse every day, with no cameras, no crowd, no intervention. We have to be honest about that." Ellington's refusal to personalize the outrage elevated the conversation to a broader and more uncomfortable national dialogue. Why are black service members, who risk their lives defending American freedoms, still treated with suspicion at home? His dignified response earned him widespread admiration, not just among fellow military personnel, but also from civil rights advocates, lawmakers, and everyday citizens. Veterans groups rallied to Ellington's side, calling for increased protections for service members against racial profiling. The American Legion and Veterans of Foreign Wars, VFW, issued joint statements condemning the treatment of Ellington, urging Congress to consider legislative measures that would mandate bias training and accountability standards across all law enforcement agencies that interacted with military personnel. Political leaders, too, took notice. Several senators and members of Congress, including a bipartisan coalition, cited Ellington's experience as evidence of the urgent need for police reform legislation that had stalled in recent months. The story even caught the attention of President Julius Sanderson, who mentioned it during a speech at the National Defense University, saying, "We must ensure that those who wear the uniform abroad are honored, not humiliated, when they come home." As for Hope Mills, the town found itself grappling with a painful self-reckoning. Community meetings, once sparsely attended, overflowed with residents demanding change. Chief Sander Whitaker implemented immediate reforms, including mandatory bias and de-escalation training for all officers, a complete overhaul of hiring practices to ensure thorough background checks, and the establishment of a civilian oversight board to review misconduct allegations. It wasn't just the police department that felt the impact. Local schools incorporated lessons on racial bias and civic duty into their curricula. Churches and civic organizations hosted dialogues on systemic racism and the intersection of patriotism and social justice. What began as a moment of humiliation and outrage evolved into a movement for healing and reform, one that Major General Ellington quietly encouraged but refused to dominate. In private, those close to Ellington said he carried the incident like he had carried so many burdens in his career. Stoically, but not without pain, he continued to mentor young officers and soldiers, often emphasizing that the true measure of a leader is not how they perform when celebrated, but how they conduct themselves when wronged. As the months passed, the case against Stokes moved through the courts. Plea negotiations fell apart after Stokes initially refused to accept responsibility. In a trial that drew national media attention, several witnesses testified, and the viral video was shown repeatedly. Ultimately, the jury found Stokes guilty of false imprisonment and unlawful detention. He was sentenced to 2 years probation, mandated to complete extensive racial bias training, and barred from working in law enforcement again. The verdict, though seen by some as too lenient, symbolized a rare instance of accountability. For many, it was a small but meaningful step toward justice. For Ellington, it was validation that dignity and truth, even when challenged, could prevail. In a final public statement after the sentencing, Ellington said, "Justice is not about vengeance. It's about accountability. It's about ensuring that no one else, not another soldier, not another citizen, has to endure what I did. My hope is that we continue to strive toward a country where dignity is not conditional and respect is not reserved." Hope Mills slowly moved forward, changed forever by a single moment at a gas station that revealed so much about the work still to be done. Deputy Raphael Boone, whose swift and courageous intervention prevented the situation from spiraling even further out of control, found himself thrust into an unexpected spotlight. In the immediate aftermath, Boone was widely praised by community leaders. civil rights groups, and many citizens for his bravery and sense of justice. Social media hailed him as a hero, a public servant who stood up not only for a man, but for the principles of fairness and accountability that law enforcement was meant to embody. Yet within his own ranks, the reaction was more complicated. Some of Boone's fellow officers viewed his actions with suspicion, accusing him, quietly and behind closed doors, of breaking the so-called blue wall of silence. A few saw his intervention as a betrayal, a public airing of internal problems that should have been handled discreetly, if at all. Boone, however, remained resolute. He stood by his decision without hesitation, stating in interviews and departmental meetings that loyalty to the badge could never supersede loyalty to justice. "I didn't intervene because I wanted attention," Boone said in an interview several months later. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. If we aren't willing to hold each other accountable, then what does this uniform even stand for?" Invited to speak on several police reform panels, both locally and at state-level conferences, Boone became an unexpected voice for a growing movement within law enforcement. Officers committed to change from within. His talks emphasized the importance of early intervention, peer accountability, and rebuilding public trust through transparent action rather than defensive silence. He argued that true brotherhood among officers wasn't about covering up wrongs, but about holding each other to higher standards because the stakes were too high not to. Meanwhile, Major General Maurice Ellington quietly rejected the flood of national media requests that poured in after the incident. Cable news networks, major newspapers, and talk shows all wanted exclusive interviews, offering platforms for him to share his story and condemn the system that had failed him. But Ellington, true to his lifelong principles of humility and purpose-driven leadership, chose a different path. He limited his public comments to small, often overlooked venues, local veterans halls, ROTC programs, and community centers where young people gathered. At these events, he spoke not about anger or vengeance, but about perseverance, integrity, and the responsibility each citizen carries to stand for the right things, even when it costs you something. "Honor is not just about what you do when people are watching," he told one roomful of young cadets. "It's about what you're willing to do when no one is watching, and when standing tall might leave you standing alone." The simplicity and moral clarity of his message resonated deeply. For Ellington, the incident was never about seeking sympathy or applause. It was about exposing a reality that too many prefer to ignore, that even the uniform of a U.S. Army Major General could not shield a black man from suspicion and mistreatment. His refusal to center himself as a victim allowed the broader systemic issues to remain the focus, giving the moment enduring weight. Across Hope Mills and beyond, the gas station confrontation became a powerful teaching moment. Schools integrated the incident into civics and history lessons, using it as a case study to prompt discussions about implicit bias, authority, and civil rights. Students debated the responsibilities of citizens and public servants alike, learning that injustice was not an abstract historical concept, but a living reality that demanded vigilance. In police academies and precincts throughout North Carolina, and later across the country, the footage of the encounter became mandatory viewing during diversity, equity, and inclusion training. Recruits were asked to analyze the mistakes made, not to shame, but to learn how perception clouded judgment, how authority can be abused when left unchecked, and how quick thinking and moral courage, like that displayed by Boone, could change the course of a crisis. Ellington's story became a sobering reminder that the fight against bias and injustice does not end at the courtroom steps or the battlefield gates. It persists in everyday moments, at gas stations, on sidewalks, in moments of casual interaction, where assumptions take root faster than facts. And in that reminder, in that painful but necessary mirror held up to American society, there was also a thread of hope, that accountability could be real, that courage could emerge from unexpected places, and that, in standing for the right things, true leadership could still light the way forward in the end. Neither man sought accolades, fanfare, or public adoration. For Major General Maurice Ellington, the ordeal was never about personal vindication. It was about the countless others whose stories go untold, whose dignity is stripped away in moments where no cameras roll and no bystanders intervene. He knew that for every incident that captured national outrage, thousands more unfolded quietly, invisibly, leaving scars on lives that society often refused to see. His restraint in the aftermath was not born of weakness, but of strength, The kind of strength that understands that true justice must be broader than a single name, a single story, or a single headline. And for Deputy Raphael Boone, the decision to step forward was instinctive, almost automatic. He didn't act to be hailed as a hero or to earn commendations. He acted because his conscience demanded it, because integrity for him was not situational but absolute. Boone knew there would be costs. Strained relationships within his department, whispered doubts about his loyalty among peers. Yet he bore those burdens with the same quiet dignity that Ellington had modeled for him years earlier on foreign soil. In both men's lives, duty did not end at the limits of comfort or convenience. It demanded courage especially when it was hardest to summon. Their quiet resilience, more than the viral footage, became the true legacy of that day. It outlasted the news cycles, the outrage, the courtroom verdicts. It seeped deeper, challenging communities to look inward, to confront not just the overt acts of injustice, but the subtle, often invisible biases that shape perception and decision-making. It forced difficult conversations, not just about policing, but about who we see as safe, who we see as suspicious, and why. Ellington and Boone never sought to become symbols. Yet, in their unwillingness to be defined by victimhood or bitterness, they offered something even more powerful, a living example of courage, humility, and moral clarity. Their stories serve as a mirror, at once painful and necessary, inviting every citizen, every officer, every leader to ask themselves a simple, uncomfortable question. When the moment comes, will I stand for the right thing?